Hello YouTube, this is video number 10 in my Happy Wheels retrospective series. I am going to conclude my discussion of glitches and bugs in the game. As I mentioned at the end of the previous part, this video is going to be quite different from the previous two. I've always intended for this retrospective series to be informative, which it is. I'm providing detailed explanations of phenomena that have occurred in the game, so that they are preserved for the future, and so that players less experienced than myself can understand the game more deeply without having to play the game for thousands of hours, as I have. I've included specific video evidences of the phenomena that I describe, so far as I'm reasonably able to capture them and organize them in a clear visual composition. But these videos are also for entertainment, and they also contain my personal anecdotes and opinions about my experiences in the game. This video is leaning heavily into that last point that I listed. I'm going to cover my personal opinions and deep thoughts about how glitches are implemented in Happy Wheels, and what I think the developers should have done differently to make the game better with reference to how glitches work. In comparison to the previous parts, this one is less descriptive and more opinionated. I'm going to entertain some hypothetical scenarios that don't necessarily have a basis in specific events that I or any other player has experienced in the game. Still, I think that such scenarios are important to building a broad and comprehensive understanding of how glitches occur in Happy Wheels, and how users utilize these glitches in their game design. So, I've covered quite a few important glitches and bugs so far. There's the black hole glitch, and the shape limit increase glitch, and the melt glitch, among others. Now, as interesting as all of these glitches are, I think there's a fundamental flaw in Fancy Force's design philosophy when it comes to glitches. This problem has become more apparent now that the JavaScript port is public, and that several glitches have been fixed or patched out. I don't think that they should have left major glitches unaddressed for years at a time and allowed users to exploit these glitches to the extent that they have. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like glitches, as a concept. As much frustration as they have caused me in some of my playthroughs, I find them to be fascinating. In some cases, the discovery of a glitch can actually enrich gameplay and make the game more fun. I'll give you an example. One of my all-time favorite glitches in gaming is the backward long jump in Super Mario 64. To give a brief explanation, there's no practical limit to the speed at which Mario can move when he's jumping backward. If you jump backwards several times in a very specific manner, Mario can build up some insane speed. Players can use this glitch to skip past major portions of the game, and even intersect through walls at certain points. In addition to just looking awesome, the BLJ completely revolutionized the meta of Super Mario 64. It added at least 3 new categories to the speedrunning scene, and almost all major runners use it in some way. Now, obviously, the developers did not originally intend for backward long jumps to be used in this way. They even patched the glitch out of the game when Nintendo re-released Super Mario 64 in 1997. They put a firm limit on the backward speed that Mario can reach, effectively making the glitch impossible to implement in any useful way. Then, Nintendo made the interesting choice to switch back to the original unpatched version when they released Mario 64 on Virtual Console, again making the BLJ skips possible. Then they switched back to the patched version for 3D All-Stars on the Switch. Here's where I'm going with this. There are these 2 separate versions of Super Mario 64. There's the original game that has the BLJ glitch, and there's the newer version in which the glitch has been patched out. That's called the Shindo version, if you're curious. You can play whichever version you like. Both can be purchased on physical cartridges, and have been made available digitally in the past. Out of necessity, the 3D All-Stars Shindo version is listed separately on speedrunning sites. It wouldn't make much sense to compare times across 2 different game versions, between which major gameplay strategies are completely different. So the same backward long jump glitch is available to all Mario 64 players who choose to use it. They can all experience it the same way, regardless of when they are playing the game. However, the situation is very different for a game like Happy Wheels. It's an online game that's contained entirely within Fancy Force's servers. The great majority of Happy Wheels levels are only available on TotalJerkface.com. We players don't have the luxury of downloading our preferred patched version of the game and playing it offline. It is possible to acquire a Swift file of the demo version of Happy Wheels and play it offline, but that version only contains a small number of levels. Because we have to play on this one site, we only have access to the current stable version of the game. If Fancy Force pushes an update that disables a glitch that was utilized in a certain subset of levels, we can't go back to the older pre-update version of the game to play the level as it was designed. The older version is no longer available. You may think that I'm overstating the obvious here. After all, every major online game has bug fixes after a while. That's to be expected. The developers want to correct errors that they made in the development process. Bug fixes can make the game run better as intended and reduce the instances of bugs that can ruin the experience and frustrate players. But here's why Happy Wheels is fundamentally different from other online games. The great majority of content in Happy Wheels is user-made. The players don't necessarily know the best practices of game design, but many of them are quite resourceful. Users have discovered several glitches and bugs in the game that have allowed them to overcome certain limitations of the game's engine. These bugs and glitches become integral tools in the toolset of level design, and users develop their own design philosophies with these tools in mind. The two most important glitches of this nature, I think, are the black hole glitch and the glitch to increase the shape limit. Both have been used in very many levels, and there are many levels that either wouldn't work properly or would just be impossible to make without the use of either glitch. This may be a problem. Remember that these are glitches. Jim's team did not design these features intentionally with any use in mind. They emerged completely arbitrarily and by accident due to errors and oversights in the game's programming. If a glitch is created by accident, it can easily be disabled by another accident. Let's conjecture for a moment that the shape limit glitch existed because of an error in a certain line of the game's programming. Let's say that the year is early 2015. The default shape limit in the level editor is 600, but very many level creators use the shape limit glitch to make levels that contain more than 600 shapes. Fancy Force is just about to add a new tool to the level editor. Let's say the art tool, for example. To do this, they have to change some of the programming in the game to tweak how the engine counts shapes and art to accommodate for the new tool. They rewrite a few lines of programming, which, incidentally, include the line that contains the error that led to the shape limit glitch. By making this change, they unintentionally disable the shape limit glitch. The change goes into full effect and affects all players once the next system update is put online. Now, what would actually happen in this scenario? We don't entirely know. I'm sure that there exist a lot of factors that could affect different outcomes. At the minimum, it would be impossible to make a new level that contains more than 600 shapes. This would be an issue at least until Fancy Force further increases the default shape limit, which they eventually did. At worst, an error like this may make all levels that contain more than 600 shapes completely unplayable. The engine may not be able to process a number of shapes that exists outside of the set range. I think that a scenario similar to what I'm describing has actually happened recently in Happy Wheels, though it probably wasn't a result of small, incremental changes. I've only observed this problem since the website switched over to the JavaScript version of Happy Wheels. That version had to be entirely ported over from the Flash version, and I imagine that they had to rewrite major portions of the programming to make the game work without the Flash Player plugin. Anyway, here's the problem. The JavaScript port is based on the newest stable release of the Flash version, which means that it has a solid cap of 900 shapes per level, and there's no glitch to increase the limit. As I've established, there are some levels that were made on older Flash versions, and that use the glitch to contain more than 900 shapes. Cryptus's level Subject 729749 is probably the best known example. I've tried to play this level in the JavaScript version, and it's never worked for me. I've even tried it in multiple different computers and browsers, and it still hasn't worked. Firstly, it takes like 30 seconds just to get past the blue loading screen. When the level finally loads, it's frozen on this black screen. Now, there is supposed to be a black screen at the beginning of this level, but it's supposed to fade away to reveal the environment of the level. It's not fading away here. For whatever reason, the game is frozen and it can't load the rest of the level. As far as I can tell, this level is currently completely unplayable, and I haven't observed this exact phenomenon with any other level. My best guess is that this is happening because the level contains more than the allowed 900 shapes. If anyone knows of other levels that contain more than 900 shapes, I'd be very curious to know whether or not you've been able to play them on the JavaScript port. Unfortunately, I don't have a long list of every level with their exact shape counts. Nobody was really rigorously keeping track of that. I only know the shape count for Subject because Cryptus listed it in his video. There was also a problem with the black hole glitch when Happy Wheels made the switch from Flash to JavaScript. As I've explained, for the black hole to work, you have to make a non-fixed shape that has its density set to a value that is not a real number. When the JavaScript version first released, there was no way to do this. The level editor would not even allow users to input a value that it did not recognize as a real number. Any value that you were to input had to include a number, and if it contained a decimal point, the point had to appear in its proper syntactic position after the ones place. If you were to click on the shape and try to change its density to the nan value, it wouldn't register. The density would just default back to whatever value it was before. If you tried to place down a new shape while there were an asyntactic string entered, the game wouldn't even let you place down the shape. For the first several weeks of the JavaScript version, it was completely impossible to make a new level that utilized the black hole glitch. Fortunately, I could still play older levels that were made with the glitch, and they worked correctly. I checked in on the level editor once in a while to see whether or not the glitch worked. Finally, in late February, I noticed that it is once again possible to make black holes in the level editor. The Fantasy Force staff must have realized that black holes are an important tool used in many levels, so they programmed them back into the game, this time intentionally. Hopefully there won't be any more instances of black holes becoming unusable in the future. Now that they're explicitly a feature and not the result of an unintentional glitch, I think that it's less likely that they'll be unintentionally disabled in any future updates or ports. So, here's the fundamental flaw in the design philosophy of leaving major glitches in the game and allowing level designers to make levels that require the glitches to function. There's always the possibility that the glitch will be disabled in the future, either unintentionally or through some purposeful change implemented by the developers. In an online game like Happy Wheels, which has undergone several updates and a complete port, this is very likely to happen. When the developers come to know of major glitches that affect gameplay, they should address them immediately, either by removing them, or, if they're useful to game design, as some of these glitches are, by intentionally integrating them into the game's programming as mechanics. The longer that they leave the glitches unaddressed, the more people learn of them, and the more levels they appear in. That means that, ultimately, more levels and level design strategies will be affected in the event that it is impossible to reproduce the glitch in the future. The situation of glitches in Happy Wheels is actually more difficult than in most games that receive updates, and most games that are hosted entirely online. When I refer to a glitch in a game, I'm usually talking about an unexpected outcome that has no intentional purpose in gameplay. The developers weren't aware of the glitch when they were making the game, so they certainly couldn't have made it a requirement to complete the game. Imagine, for a moment, that the backward long jump glitch were to somehow disappear from all versions of Super Mario 64. People would still be able to play the game as it was intended. You don't need to use the glitch to win. All that would change is that some speedrunning categories would no longer be playable. But with many Happy Wheels levels, some glitches are necessary for the level to work as intended. Level designers have figured out how to use these glitches in their design process. That's not something that you would see in most other games, in which the programmers and the level designers belong to the same team, and there's a two-way dialogue between the two groups. For most levels with an end card to display correctly, there needs to be a black hole glitch. And for the level Subject 729749 to even load fully, the engine has to be able to render more than 900 shapes, as it has in the past. If the engine can't do that anymore, I can't even play the level, much less complete it. And that's not the fault of the level creators. They were using tools that were available to them at the time when they were designing their levels, and that allowed them to increase the potential of the engine. It's the fault of the developers, who did a poor job of moderating their own game design tools. They allowed these glitches to be exploitable and unregulated for years, and then suddenly allowed them to be disabled with updates, ruining the proper functioning of some levels already published, and some yet to be completed in the level editor. So, those are my opinions about all of that. Obviously, these are complex issues that are subject to different interpretations. I think that I've made a strong case for my own stance. At the end of this third video, I want to quickly describe some of the minor newer glitches that I've discovered since I started making these past 3 videos. So far, I've mostly been covering some really old glitches that have existed since the very early years of Happy Wheels. Most of them don't even exist in the current version of the game. Now, I'm going to cover some newer glitches that I've discovered since I started playing the JavaScript port. This port seems to be quite stable. They've fixed the resolution problem, which was my only major complaint when the port first released. Now, the game displays in full HD when I go into full screen, so now it looks and plays very much the same as some of the later Flash versions, strenuous controls and all. I wouldn't have expected for there to be any major new glitches in JavaScript. This is pretty much a one-to-one direct port of the most recent release of Happy Wheels in Flash Player. Most of the older glitches that I've already described had already been fixed, and the new team didn't add any new mechanics to the game. There wasn't a lot of room to add new programming that may contain new errors. Of course, the JavaScript port is still quite new, and I'll admit that I haven't exhaustively played the game to find every possible area where a glitch may appear. At this time, I've only played the JavaScript port for about 50 hours. That's a far cry from the thousands of hours that I put into various Flash releases over the course of 8 years. So it's very possible that I've missed some small glitches that exist in the new port. Anyway, here's what I found. Sometimes, when a Segway Guy NPC's leg is broken off, the top part of the leg will suddenly become much larger than usual. For whatever reason, this only happens to this one character. When this happens, the large leg segment tends to fly up into the air and land a distance away from the other body parts. Other than that, it interacts like any normal leg segment. Despite its size, the lawnmower can easily destroy it. The leg doesn't always become big. I've noticed that this graphical bug tends to occur when the damage that cuts off the leg also kills Segway Guy. Look at this recording. The first time that I run him over, I only cut off one of his legs. He survives, and the leg comes off at its normal size. Then I land on top of him a second time, killing him that time. A large upper leg segment flies forward. Sometimes when blood spatters in the JavaScript port, the blood will appear to be frozen in place at some point. It will continue to appear on screen, instead of dripping down or otherwise disappearing. And this phenomenon only affects blood graphics that are on screen at the exact moment when the bug occurs. So if you move the field of view after the blood gets frozen, you may see a sharp, flat cutoff that represents where the edge of the screen was previously. I guess that any blood that goes off screen just doesn't exist anymore, as far as this bug works. The frozen blood disappears as soon as the engine renders a new spatter of blood. I have no idea why this happens or how to trigger it. It just seems to happen arbitrarily once in a while. Oh, on the subject of blood, the blood spatter effect has a unique visual effect on blade weapon number 9, the small dagger. The dagger's hitbox seems to be the same as it was in the Flash versions. However, when it becomes covered in blood, it appears to be much larger than it is. It's like the blood is revealing the outline of an invisible part of the blade that's somehow there. The shape looks like that of an ornate halberd. I've only seen this with blade weapon number 9. The others appear as one would expect, when spattered with blood. Alright, while interesting, these 3 are only graphical bugs. They have no effect on gameplay. Perhaps I'm backtracking slightly on my rule that I established in video 8. Well, here's a bug that actually affects gameplay. In part 5, I stated that Effective Shopper was the only character that I knew to be able to control her vehicle with 4 broken limbs. This is a very rare state that only occurs when the character isn't knocked out of the vehicle, and it usually doesn't last long enough to be useful in completing a level. I made part 5 before the JavaScript port released. Having played the new port, I now know that Irresponsible Dad can control his vehicle in a similar way. In this replay, his limbs are broken off by the wrecking ball, but he manages to stay on the vehicle for a moment. I can clearly see that I still have control of the vehicle's wheels, and I can drive forward until the wrecking ball swings back and knocks him off. This bug may have affected this character in the Flash version, but I doubt it. I never saw this in all of my years of playing the Flash version, and I haven't seen any accounts of other players experiencing it at that time. Meanwhile, I discovered it after only a few hours of playing the new port. There's probably some small difference in the programming of the physics of the controls that makes it easier for Irresponsible Dad to control his bicycle when he's not physically on it. In any case, this bug is so incredibly rare and unlikely that you can't realistically integrate it into a strategy to play the game. Well, this concludes my discussions of glitches in Happy Wheels. Thank you for watching. Hopefully, you'll see my next retrospective video whenever that's complete. Goodbye.